So I'd like to welcome you. This afternoon, we are going to delve into academic, health, social, community awareness from the lens of chronic absenteeism, today's national crisis. We're going to discuss and leave this webinar with not only a clear definition of what chronic absenteeism is, understand its impact, discuss why it's an educational equity concern, but understand why chronic absenteeism matters. We're going to talk about solutions where we can invest financially and with professional capital towards reducing chronic absenteeism in all our nation's schools. Let's begin with understanding the difference between truancy and chronic absenteeism. Truancy is a general term that refers to unexcused absences, which lead schools in practices that focus primarily on compliance. Chronic absenteeism, on the other hand, incorporates all absences, excused, unexcused, and suspensions, which impacts academic consequences and lost instructional time. Given this broader focus, addressing chronic absenteeism becomes an issue for our entire nation. As a former program manager for attendance and discipline of a large urban district, I can say attendance matters. Students need to feel welcome socially and emotionally engaged to attend and fully engage in the learning process. Whether it's in a traditional brick and mortar school, an online program, or a high quality after school program in order to benefit. While showing up doesn't guarantee learning, a student who misses class cannot benefit. If a large number of students miss classes, it's an indication of challenges that require systemic solutions. While good attendance from preschool onward leads to academic progress, poor attendance has several negative effects. So we're going to look at some data slides on chronic absence. This slide shows the impact of chronic absences beginning at pre-K and first, which leads to the inability to read on grade level by the end of third grade. The inability to read at grade level by third grade directly impacts academic achievement into middle school. The data slide shows you that students who do not read at grade level are 4 times more likely to drop out of high school. What we believe and what we know is students who attend school regularly in an early grades pre-K3 are more likely to able to read grade level, which positively impacts academic achievement in middle school. High school students are more likely to graduate and are more likely to persist towards college and graduate. Our next slide shows the ethnic disaggregation of about 14.6 million chronically absent students nationwide. Every ethnic group is affected. Our white students are represented in blue, are showing at 36%. Our Latino students, which shows in dark green, is at 35%. And our African American students are shown in dark blue at 20%. These groups are our largest numbers. Our next slide shows chronically absent students from all ethnic backgrounds. Our Pacific Islanders, our Hispanic students, African Americans, and Native Americans, as you can see by this slide, are disproportionately higher. This is an equity issue nationally. Now I'd like you to please welcome Adam Schott, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary, Office of Elementary and Secondary Education, Department of Education. Thank you, Adam, for being and joining us.
Thank you so much, Lauren. And thank you to the members and staff of ASWA for your steadfast leadership and partnership. Over the last several years, that leadership and partnership has been tested by a once-in-a-century pandemic, by a youth mental health crisis, and by the urgent work of academic recovery. You've responded by ensuring nutritious meals for students when schooling was remote, by supporting your staff when the work of safely reopening schools seemed insurmountable, and by being there for your parents and families as we've tried to restore a sense of normalcy for young people. Ultimately, restoring that normalcy depends on getting our students back in school more consistently. And we know that every other goal we hold for our kids, improved achievement, higher graduation rates, and more, depends on it. I want to thank Attendance Works for their work in raising public awareness around chronic absence and for helping more parents, families, and policymakers confront the same data that all of you as school leaders are examining each day. The good news is we're seeing some modest improvement in regular school attendance over the last 2 years. And the better news is we have good evidence on what can keep those data headed in the right direction. Thanks to the President's American Rescue Plan, Fort Worth Independent School District hired 100 family engagement specialists to ensure students return to school and keep coming regularly, which has helped 3,000 students improve their attendance. Kansas City, Kansas Public Schools created attendance teams that analyze data to develop interventions based on specific areas of need. And the School District of Philadelphia deployed teams of caring adults to go out into the community and re-engage missing students. The Secretary and his team know that you are continuing to urgently spend American Rescue Plan resources to improve student attendance and outcomes. We know that you're also planning for how to sustain those programs next school year and the school year after that. As you engage in that planning, we hope you'll consult key department resources, including dedicated technical assistance and peer learning opportunities from our Student Engagement and Attendance Center. We urge you to look to the department's discretionary grant portfolio for additional funding, including programs like full service community schools, which has been increased 5-fold since the president took office. And we urge you to reach out to your state's regional comprehensive center or regional education lab to examine local chronic absenteeism data and identify evidence-based strategies. Alongside these supports, I want to quickly remind you about one of your own. As Lauren showed, we know that rates of chronic absence are especially concerning for vulnerable student groups, and that students experiencing homelessness face particular barriers. With roughly 7 months to go in the allowability period for the American Rescue Plan's Homeless Children and Youth Program, please take 5 minutes after today's webinar and check to see if your school district has remaining funds in this account. If you do, consider whether there's an opportunity to leverage these funds to promote regular school attendance for kids experiencing homelessness. On behalf of Secretary Cardona and the U.S. Department of Education, thank you for the chance to join today's discussion and for your hard work every single day on behalf of schools, students, and families.
Adam, thank you so very much. At this time, I'd like to proudly introduce Cecilia Leong. She is working with Attendance Work and the Vice President of Programs. Thank you, Cecilia.
Thank you so much for the invitation and opportunity to speak to this wonderful audience. Jack, let's put on the next slide, please. So I have the opportunity to share some of our basic frameworks in preparation for sharing from our esteemed guests and administrators, and to take you to the ground level where effective work is happening. But first, I'd like to share about some of the key things that lead to improved attendance. Next slide. So we so much want to get to the student outcomes, better attendance, better achievement, and we often want to go right there. But the pathway for change really starts with changing mindsets about attendance and how we think of families and students. It also then needs actionable data. We need to know who and how many students we're trying to reach. And capacity is a key piece, making sure that everyone sees their role in improving attendance. And evidence-based strategies are key. We've learned a lot in the last decade about what really works to improve attendance and the evidence that's behind it. And all those pieces are what we need in order to achieve outcomes. Next slide. So another few words about mindset. Often we are stuck in the old ways of doing business, and we tend to approach students and families with a problem focus rather than a partnership focus. So, for example, you may have seen some of this in your own buildings. We only approach families to address a problem. We don't talk to them otherwise. Whereas when we're thinking of partnership, the initial outreach is about building a relationship. Problem focus, it's one-way messaging so that those people understand and do what we hope they will do, rather than listening to families and finding out what they hope for their child. Problem focus is looking only at barriers, whereas in partnership, we're looking for those strengths and assets to build upon to overcome challenges. And finally, this is a failing that we often have as very educated, smart people, that we think we have all the answers and we know what's best for families and students. And I don't want to dismiss the fact that we do know many answers and we often have good ideas, but the solution has to be one that collaborates and encourages people, families, and students to build on their own assets and priorities. So that is a fundamental shift in how we think. Then we are able to build a multi-tiered system of support for attendance. When we started doing this work over a decade ago, we saw most of the effort being put at that tier 3 level of intervention, when students have missed so much school that it takes incredible numbers of people and intensive resources to achieve change. Instead, we've been pushing tier 1 universal strategies that make students want to come to school, and layering on support when that's needed for early intervention. So that's the movement that we're trying to make, and you're going to hear from 2 administrators later on about how this really happens in real life, in real time. And you'll notice that this pyramid rests on foundational supports, and those foundational supports promote positive conditions for learning. Next slide. These positive conditions for learning, you'll notice, have relationships at the center. Those are essential for every student, regardless of their attendance. When students encounter these positive conditions for learning, they're more likely to attend school because they feel physically and emotionally healthy and safe. They feel a sense of belonging, connection, and support. They feel excited about what they're learning because it's challenging and relevant. And finally, there are adults in the building who are emotionally healthy and able to support them. So these things are all necessary for a healthy, functioning school environment, and we know they've been affected by the pandemic and the events of the past few years. Next slide. So with relationships at the center, we can make a real difference. But we also know that our data out there really shows that relationships with teachers have declined and with caring adults have declined over the course of a student's life in school. And so what does this mean for what we have to do? Next slide. We've really seen that the reasons for absence have shifted over the past few years. Typically, we think of 4 big buckets: barriers, aversion, disengagement, and misconceptions. And what we're seeing is some of the same barriers are still there, but they've shifted. We see a lot more going on in terms of mental health issues and aversion. I've heard a lot about bullying, for example. And when you look at the different pieces, I think what really stands out are misconceptions that about school and about absences. So these are all key things you'll hear more about and strategies to address them. Next slide. I had referenced earlier that we've learned a lot about evidence-based strategies, and this is a key resource for every single one of you that is seeking to find solutions faster. This is the attendance playbook that we worked on with Future Ed, and it really is the Bible in terms of our interventions that we know really make a difference for all sorts of students. So please download that along with the implementation guide. Next slide. So one of the things I really want you to hear clearly, if you're a school administrator or a district administrator or a school board leader for that matter, it really takes a team to improve attendance. With the rates of chronic absence that Lauren shared earlier in the webinar, there is no way that one single person can tackle attendance alone. Next slide. It's critical that we take a team approach, and school leaders are essential in terms of organizing and facilitating that school-wide attendance strategy that's linked to much greater outcomes for all students. Next slide. So school teams don't have to be standalone attendance teams, but it's really important that they perform some key functions. Organizing that multi-tiered attendance strategy, looking at the data, both quantitative and qualitative, to see which groups of students need more support or which ones are doing really well and are showing that you're doing something right and you want to do more of it. Really making sure that you're looking at assets as well as barriers that affect attendance and doing that important leadership job of mobilizing everyone in the school community to address attendance. And finally, something we all need to be disciplined about is determining if we're making a difference and either adopting, adapting, or abandoning those interventions that don't work. Okay, next slide. So we are going to be talking about effective school strategies, but what I want you to note is that members of our team are dropping some resources into the chat about schools and school teams that really have made a difference. And so you'll see some bright spot studies from Connecticut and California that Kathy will drop for you into the chat that you can also read as well. But at this point, I would like to turn it over to my colleague and dear friend, Hetty Chang, who will be moderating a panel discussion about effective school studies. Hetty?
Thank you so much, Cecilia, for giving that overview. We're actually going to change around things just a tiny little bit. I'm going to ask Lauren to join me also. We actually realized that we wanted to make sure before we go into the panel, we know a little bit more about who's in the audience, because that'll allow us to tailor what we are saying to where you're at. So we're going to just do a quick poll. So who's in the audience? Are you from your district central office staff? Are you an elementary school administrator? Are you a secondary school administrator? Are you maybe a community school manager? Because we know we have more community schools than ever and people working on that. Are you a school board member? Are you a teacher? And we know there are many, many other roles. So there's also our other box, and we might not have captured that. And I'm going to have Lauren, help me to also, and you can drop that in the chat if you're not there. But Lauren, maybe you can help me talk about who's in the audience. I know that meeting Lauren, she was both a couple of those things in her lives, both a principal, and then I met her as a district administrator. Now, so it's so helpful though to know where people are coming from.
Thank you so much, Hetty. We talked about that it takes a team effort. And so it takes all of these positions, our central office staff, our administrators in both elementary and secondary sites. We need our community managers and we need policymakers, our school boards, and we can't do this work without our teachers. So please, we invite you to take a look and to actively participate, identify who you are, So thank you all in advance for doing this work and being a part of this conversation.
Do you want to launch I think the poll's launched. Do we have the results? Yeah.
It looks like we have the results. All righty. So it appears as if we've got about 27% of our audience that are from district central office staff. We've got 11% that are representing elementary school administrators. 13% appear to be from our secondary school administrators. We have community school managers in the house at 3%. We don't have any school board members, but we know that the rest of you that are on here are going to share this information with your local school board members. And we have teachers at 2%. And we also have a great body at 43% of those that don't identify or chose not to identify with either of those. So we welcome all of you in this house for this robust conversation. Thank you so much for presenting.
And I would just add that in the chat, we're seeing lots of what those roles are. School social workers, MTSS coordinators. We have things called child welfare and attendance liaisons, different things that are all in that chat. So so appreciate you being there. Now with that, we're now going to go back to our fabulous panel. And we've had the pleasure of both working in Grand Rapids and also in Connecticut. Really appreciate that Victoria Simon with Aberdeen Academy and Ryan Broderick with Bristol Central High School could help make a difference. You know, we've seen both of them in action over the years in different ways, really changing what's happened with attendance. But I think I'm going to ask each of them to actually say a little bit more about their schools, so you know about their demographics and their student population, their communities. And we're going to start with Victoria first. So appreciate you being here. And Victoria, tell us a bit about Aberdeen Academy.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here and helping out attendance work, since they've certainly helped us quite a bit. I'm with Aberdeen Academy, which is a preschool through 8th grade school in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So it's in an urban environment. We have about 250 students. And traditionally, our school has been demographically about a third as far as African Americans, white, and Hispanic. So we only have about 10% of our population is English language learners. And I say only because in Grand Rapids, that's actually a very low number. And the economically disadvantaged is around 87%. We are 100% free and reduced lunch, so it's a little bit difficult to assess that. And we have about 32% of our students have IEPs, including 13% who are identified as being on the spectrum of autism. So we definitely have a very high special education population in our building.
Great. Thank you, Victoria. And I want to just acknowledge Mel Atkins, who oversees all the work on attendance and has really been a key partner with all the principals in Grand Rapids is in the audience. So welcome, Mel. And Victoria does you proud. All right, Ryan, tell us about your school at Bristol Central High School.
Thanks, Edie. I appreciate the invite today, and I'm looking quite forward to the conversation we're going to have over the next half hour or so. Again, my name is Ryan Broderick. I am the proud assistant principal at Bristol Central High School in Bristol, Connecticut. We're a school of about 1,220 students. We have been as high as 1,270 recently, and we have seen a slightly smaller student population. We've seen quite the increase over the past 10 years or so in students of color. So we currently are about 43.5% white, our student population, about 8% Black. We've seen our largest increases in our Hispanic and Latino population, which sit just over 41%. Very similar to what Victoria was saying, our academically, or excuse me, our free and reduced population is well over 50% right now, but all students do receive free and reduced lunch. So we have about 54% who qualify. We sit around 23% special education, and around 8% of our multilingual learners are here. So again, there are a lot of similarities. We are a comprehensive 9 through 12 high school. In my community, we do have another comprehensive high school as well, Bristol Eastern High School, which has about 100 less students, but very, very similar. And so as I talk about this work today, it really has been a team effort, both with central office staff, support staff, as well as, monthly meetings with our crosstown friends. So the collaboration has been fantastic. We continue to learn and grow with one another. And we have about 92 certified staff. So we've saw an influx of staffing, especially support staff, with our ESSER funds as well. So we're looking forward to discussing, how we've utilized some of that money.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Now we're going to go back over to Victoria. Victoria, talk to us about what's happening with your chronic absence data. How has it changed? And then I'm going to ask a follow-up question about what are you seeing about the major causes of chronic absence. But first, tell us about your data.
Okay, well, you have a glimpse of it on the screen before you. And quite frankly, I was a little surprised to be asked to do this because, in my opinion, we're not there yet. So just like we have the growth mindset with our kids, I have a growth mindset regarding our attendance. We are not where we need to be yet. Our our severely chronic at 9% is still way too high. So the 3 years that are shown in front of you, the first one is on the left is 2021-22, in the middle is 22-23, and then the right is 23-24. So this is coming out of the pandemic. And in 21-22, we actually still had a pretty severe number of students who were ill from COVID-19 and flu. It was a rough year. But that's not the reason for the chronic absences. There's, of course, multiple reasons, and that's what we needed to address. And so with Attendance Works support and our attendance team, we started addressing students on a more individualized basis of what are the barriers, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. But you can see, looking at the satisfactory attendance, we've gone from 23% to 26% to 37%. So even though we're not there yet, we've certainly made a substantial amount of growth. And the severe chronic going from 15 to 9, or looking overall at the severe chronic and the moderately chronic, going from what it was in 21-22 to where we are now. It certainly has been an improvement. It's just not the improvement that we're looking forward to seeing.
And Victoria, I just want to acknowledge that as a country, this is going to take ongoing attention. It's not going to be overnight improvements. It's going to be steady work over time that really gets the outcomes eventually that we want. Victoria, I also would love to, for you, as you've talked to kids and families, are there particular, are you seeing certain I know it's always multiple, but if you were to think about some of the 2 or 3 biggest, is it transportation? Is it misperceptions about when you should come to school or not because of, illness? Are you seeing things around kids and families think that, oh, they can just show up, they don't need to show up in person anymore, virtually? Like, what are you seeing as some of the challenges that are leading to this?
Right. Well, and that's what I was going to acknowledge is truly illness is a very substantial issue. Like when I looked at last week's attendance and targeting last week in particular, illness was the problem. And we can't change that. And in fact, we're going to be more careful about it now coming out of the pandemic. We're much more aware of if you have flu, stay home. So those are things we can't change. So I focus on what are the things that we really can improve. And those barriers include simply attitude towards school, that it's important to show up. And so that's what I emphasize with both students and parents, that the first step to success is showing up. So you have to be here in order to learn the academics. And like I said, I repeat that same message over and over with both parents and students. And I really appreciate that I come from a district that prioritizes the importance of attendance, and that we have a unified message, district-wide, of striving for less than 5 absences in the course of a year. And so I think having that consistent messaging from both district and the school also really helps. But the barriers, a lot of it is just that prioritizing, that showing up really is important. It's just school, it's just a day. This is your child's future, and I know how much you love your kids and how important it is for their success. They're not going to be able to read and succeed if they're not in school. Our district just announced, exciting improvements in graduation rates. It starts at this end. It starts with showing up preschool to 8th grade. And often when we talk about the stresses of attendance, kindergarten, at least in Michigan, is often dismissed because it's not the law to attend until you're at least 6 years old. But the attitudes and the importance of attending, they do start at that levels. And so I emphasize kindergarten just as much as every other grade.
Really appreciate that. I'm gonna do a little bit of defining because I can see these questions coming up in the chat. I just wanted to say these come from Attendance Works recommendations. We appreciate that many people have adopted them. We actually think it's better not to just do a quick, are you chronically absent or not? But that's what we have in policy. But actually, for knowing how you want to support kids, we offer up these bands of attendance. So satisfactory means a kid's missing less than 5% of the entire school year. Now, if it's a 180-day school year, that's less than 9 days. And we know kids then are showing up pretty much. I'm not worried about attendance as being a risk, a factor that's causing them to have academic challenge. The at risk is kids who miss between 5 and 10% of the school year. So that's 9 to 18 days. Moderate is you're missing between 10 and 20% of the school year. So if it was in days, it's 18 to 36 over the entire school year. And then severe is missing more than 20% of the entire school year. I think both Bristol and Aberdeen actually look at some of their attendance these ways, although a lot of times just for having a quick and simple version, you look at what are your overall levels of chronic absence. But we also think these levels help you assess how extensive the intervention needs to be. A kid's missing 20% or more needs a different kind of intervention than a kid missing 5 to 10%. So thank you for those questions. Thank you, Victoria. And now I'm going to turn to Ryan and have him talk a bit about what have you seen as the patterns and what do you see as some of the challenges and issues related to chronic absence.
Thanks, Edie. I'd have to just reiterate what Victoria said. We've made some great progress over the past couple of years, but we know we're not even close to where we want to be. This is an ongoing effort from a variety of stakeholders and different groups of people. And so, I'm proud of what we're presenting today, but I also know that we have a long way to go and a lot of improvement to do to really get more of our kids in school more of the time. Like the national trends and averages, at the onset of COVID in 2020, 2021, we did see a major increase in those who were chronically absent from our school. In Connecticut, like Edie said, we are defining chronically absent students as those who miss more than 10% of the school days. So in a district like mine, in which we do have families who are more mobile as well, and people moving from town to town and district to district more often, we can have a student enroll for a month, call that 20 school days, miss 4 days of school, then move elsewhere, and they are considered chronically absent towards our numbers. So just a little bit of background and context there. We saw a great increase in 21 and 22. There's a variety of reasons for that. We believe, we really worked extremely hard to bring our kids back in a safe and emotionally structured environment. We worked really hard with our faculty and staff to make sure that we were flexible and warm and welcoming to students and families as they come back, as well as continuing to create really high level instruction for students to be engaged with their learning. I will say in 21, 22, he can speak to this if she would like, but Connecticut did have kind of a funky way of tracking attendance that year. And so that may be one of the reasons why we went so low so quick as well. Last year, 22, 23, we did see ourselves go up a little bit, which, I think is misleading. That's such a great improvement from where we were kind of during the depths of COVID in 2020 and 2021, in which we saw about 22.5% of our kids be chronically absent for the year. And again, you see our numbers right now. Through February 16th of this year, we are at 21.62%. So part of me is, again, proud and happy to share those numbers. But when I look at a school our size, I realize that's 230, 240, 250 kids who still are missing 10% or more. So, the calling is there. We have to remain driven and motivated to make sure that we are putting the proper interventions in place for students who are struggling to get here as often as we would like to see them.
Ryan, can I offer one thing too about the data that I realize it might be helpful for people to understand, because data gets captured in very different ways across different states. So one thing in Connecticut in the 2021 school year, when we had a lot of virtual learning, Connecticut had a really robust definition of making sure even if you were virtual, you had to be counted as showing up at least half the day in order to be considered in school attendance. And one of the things that we saw is that Connecticut was better at noticing kids who were chronically absent in the 2021 school year than virtually any other state. So that high level, maybe if your state didn't do that, you might see your data not be quite so high in 2021, and it might just be because you weren't figuring out which kids were really chronically absent. And then in 21-22, Connecticut tried to create some ways so that if kids were sick and should just show up online, they could be counted as there, and that just made attendance a little bit less stringent, which they then stopped using that in 22-23. And so sometimes when you look at these patterns of data, they both reflect what's going on in a school to make a difference, but they also reflect differences in data practices. And you just might want to think about that when you're looking at the data. But the overall message that Bristol has really found a way to bring down its chronic absence rates by about 10%, I think still holds true.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Heidi. And as somebody who lived during that time period here in Connecticut, it was a pretty robust policy. We worked really hard to collect accurate data. You know, we were able to identify kids who were logging into their Google Classrooms and Zoom calls from, you know, their jobs. So they were, you know, selling coffee at the local coffee shop and still in school. So we worked really hard to identify those kids and get an accurate representation. I do think just some context is important too prior to the pandemic. In our building, which was about 1,270 students then, I would not consider a neighborhood school. It's a relatively urban district where kids travel from upwards of 6-7 miles away. We were around hovering 15-16% chronic absence. So although we're, again, happy and proud of these numbers, we know that we still haven't rebounded to where we would like to be since the onset of COVID. The last thing down below, I know we're going to talk strategies in a couple minutes, but we've done, you know, a lot of work of comparing data from year to year and goal setting during monthly cycles to really compare ourselves to where we are now compared to where we were last year, so we can, you know, have informed decisions and be, you know, actionable in the moment to best address this need.
And Ryan, what do you see as some of the drivers, particularly at the high school level, of chronic absenteeism?
You know, hearing what Victoria said, there are a lot of similarities, but we also, I think, have some different things as well. We do have a lot of students who drive to school who have parents who leave for work before them. So we have seen students who just haven't come. You know, the mental health side is something that has been exacerbated in the past couple of years where, you know, I heard the term crisis used by somebody earlier. There is again, a calling. There's this crisis in our building, and I think nationally that, you know, we need to do as good of a job as we can to best support our kids as we try to help them kind of overcome some of the barriers and struggles that they do have. Coming back from COVID, you know, for high school age kids, for much of 8, 10, 12 months, they spend a lot of time in their homes, in their rooms, behind screens. And with, you know, social media usage increasing, with Snapchat, with video games, we're seeing kids spend an exorbitant amount of time behind screens. So that did two things, I think. One, it made it much more challenging for kids to come back to school, to the socialization, to the early wake up. We start at 7:30 every morning. And it also has kept kids up, keeping much different hours late at night. So even today we hear, you know, kids and families talking about lights are out at 10:30 or 11, but then they're scrolling on their phones till 2:30 or 3 o'clock on TikTok. And that's made it very challenging to then wake up at 6 o'clock and get here. So, you know, there was a variety of reasons, but, you know, it's something that we've seen improve, but there's still a lot of kids. We have some kids who are working and trying to leave school early. We have kids who have been sick. We have a lot of legitimate illness. And we've also seen an increase in, as families kind of came back to quote unquote normalcy out of the pandemic, a willingness to miss more school time for family vacations, for socialization with friends, and kind of getting back to the quote unquote previous way of life.
Thank you. So I want to start talking about what works to improve attendance. And we're going to start with you, Victoria. So what are the key strategies? What have you shifted over time and what feels like it's working?
Okay. Well, I approach things in a school from the tiered perspective. It's hard for me to look at it otherwise. So some of you may be familiar with the early warning indicators where you look at the ABCs, attendance, behavior, and course performance. Well, I look at ABLE, attendance, behavior, learning, and English language learning. And I look at tiers of all of them. So with attendance, it's no different. We look at who's attending regularly. They're the tier 1, but we don't want to ignore them. They're the bulk of the school. Tier 2, who's having some troubles getting to school routinely. And then tier 3, those who are chronically absent or severely chronically absent. And relationships and recognition are what have worked for us, both at the individual and at the group level. So everyone wants to be noticed. Everyone wants to be recognized. So recognizing achievement, but also those relationships. Students want to know that we see them. We see you are here. My morning starts with greeting students at the door, which is pretty common for a lot of schools. But that's part is I have eyes on the kids and I'll say, oh, we really missed you yesterday, or I'm so glad you're here today. Are you feeling better? You know, and so right from the time they get off the bus and when they come in the door, we are building those relationships and recognizing that they're here and that we're happy they're here. Every Monday morning, I have an assembly, and at that assembly, we have a group recognition. I call it the AAA, the Awesome Attendance Award. And you can see the little picture. We have a traveling trophy. And so during this assembly, I call out the class that had the best attendance for the week prior. So the Monday through Friday, and then on Monday morning, I announce who had the best attendance. And that class gets to proudly display the trophy in their classroom. And they get so excited about it. It's such a big deal. And that's that group effort where they can hold each other accountable. But that's not enough. Each student needs to be held accountable. So that's why we've broken down tier 1, 2, 3 for individuals and for groups. So students who have 0 or 1 absence in a month, we recognize them at the end of the month. And we've done that through certificates, through SOAR tickets. And I was hoping to move into swag tags, like brag tags this year, but that didn't happen. That'll be next year. Tier 1, also, we have the strive for less than 5, that consistent messaging that I talked about. And then tier 1 and 3, we have our attendance club. Now that might sound funny. Why tier 1 and 3? Well, tier 1 is what's for everyone, right? Our attendance club started in part when we started getting involved with Attendance Works. And we looked at what were our 20 or 25 students that were either severely or moderately chronic that we knew was not because of illness, funerals, valid excuses. So we looked at the students that were struggling to get themselves to school for whatever reason. And family support connected with those families. I have a family support coordinator, so a person affiliated with our school who gets to know families. She reached out to all those families over the summer and said, would you be okay with me connecting with your child throughout the school year about their attendance? And so that family support coordinator visits our school every Friday and meets with the attendance club during lunch. So they come and meet with her, and she says, I noticed that you weren't in school on Wednesday. Why not? She gives them books or treats for showing up to school. And if they don't show up to school, then she's giving them a little pep talk and trying to find out why not and trying to remove some of those barriers. Well, the problem when we implemented attendance club was suddenly I had all these kids that wanted to be part of the attendance club because they didn't know what it took to get there. Well, I don't want everybody to suddenly have severely chronic attendance so they can join the attendance club. So I shifted and we implemented guests of the attendance club. And so I select them randomly every week. And so we have like 2 students from lower L, 2 from upper L, and 2 from middle school who are attendance club guests. And because they don't know ahead of time who's going to be selected, I announce it Friday morning. If you're chosen, you also get to meet. And if you had great attendance all week, you're getting a prize from the family support coordinator. And if you didn't have good attendance all week, then she's going to give you a talk and find out why not. So that's why it's a tier 1 and tier 3 effort, is because of that shift that we made. And that was a really positive strategic shift. But the tier 3 that it was set out to do, the attendance club, has been very effective. And I found I had one young lady who almost never showed up to school on Fridays. She started showing up simply because she knew she was going to be meeting with family support every Friday, and to look somebody in the eyes and say why they were or were not in school, but also to get that positive attention and to, earn the prizes, those sorts of things. It really did make a difference. So,
Victoria, I just want to point out what I love about that it's both tier 1 and tier 3, is that you've made sure it's not stigmatized too.
Oh,
So
exactly.
it's a positive thing, like everyone wants to be involved. Sometimes I worry that we do an attendance intervention for kids who are struggling, and then somehow it gets this reputation that it's the place for kids who are struggling. In this case, you really are able to, keep this as a positive thing that everyone wants to be a part of.
Absolutely. And it's really what our focus should be in education is on tier one always. But knowing that we need to strategize at tier 2 and tier 3, because those are kids who, for whatever reason, have some sort of a crisis or a barrier or a problem. And so we're trying to eliminate that. But always the bulk of our support should be at the tier 1 level for everyone, because it's important that everyone attends school and that we be providing the welcoming environment and the building the relationships so students want to come. Because it's a K-8 school or pre-K-8 school, most of the students are attending school or not attending school based on their families and their parents. It's not their choice whether or not they're showing up. So we want the kids to want to come to school. So if parents want to sleep in or whatever, the kids are saying, no, I can't miss because we're doing a science experiment today, or because it's our PBIS celebration, or because I have to, so we want those relationships so students want to come to school. I know that there's a lot more.
Yeah, I so
talk about
appreciate
with questions and answers.
we are going to go back into Q&A. I do want to point out one thing that Grand Rapids also did, which is you talked about those family support liaisons who met with the kids over the summer and then became part of the attendance club. There was also a pretty intensive support for them to shift to a much more positive and engaging approach. In Grand Rapids, like many places, folks started sometimes even as like truancy officers, where the notion was I gotta kind of shame kids into coming into school. Like that was present across our entire country in many ways. And there was an intentional effort to shift from blame to positive engagement, starting in the summer, where you don't even talk about attendance, but just get to build a relationship with kids and families. And it seems like that really paid off in your case in Aberdeen. And it also points to the importance of districts supporting you as principals with everything from, these attendance, the family sports specialists to the resources on schools. With that, I want to shift it over to Brian. So we just now had a picture of what this looks like at an elementary level. So what does it look like to improve attendance in a high school, Ryan?
It's really interesting coming from the high school perspective, just listening to Victoria speak. There are so many similarities, I think, between. Sure, there's developmental differences between students. There's different life events that students are experiencing. But at the same time, our focus, like theirs in Grand Rapids, has been a really robust tier 1 experience for our students.
And that's what I put on there as far as like the tier 2 and 3, having all those personal connections. Sometimes we do a check-in, check-out with students just so we know that there's an adult connecting with that student in addition to their classroom teacher, so they know that somebody cares about them and is reaching out to them. I skipped over the removing barriers because I'm going to come back to that one. That one is such an important piece. The group recognition, I mentioned Awesome Attendance Award and the welcoming environment. So I guess I'm going to come back to the removing barriers. That's a huge one because it really does take an individualized approach, and it starts with listening, talking to families and listening. Why aren't the students coming to school? And sometimes you really have to listen kind of between the lines, because they might just say they were sick. I've had, some families that it's just consistently calling in for that when you know that the child wasn't sick. And in fact, one student a couple days ago, I'd said, oh, welcome back. I'm so happy to have you here. And she said, yeah. And I said, are you feeling better? And she's like, what? And I said, well, are you feeling better? I thought you were sick. And she's like, yeah, I was sick, So I know that that was not the reason. So I had to meet with mom and find out what's really going on. And they'd had a death in the family, but they had not called that in. And the attendance, there were some issues beyond the death of a family member. It was kind of extrapolated out, but that's why I need to start by listening. What do they need? When we talk about the disproportionality, that's very serious. We have that disproportionality here too. Our severely chronic, it is much more substantial with our African-American or our Hispanic population than it is with our white population. So I also approach from the cultural piece of, the priorities or the parents' experience with school and why it's necessary to attend. Safety is also a big piece. Being an urban district and people are concerned about school safety. As I mentioned today, we are a polling location. So we had a few families that chose to keep their students home because they didn't want them in a school building where voting was taking place. Even though we'd secured the area and kept things separate, it was still a parental concern. Or with backpacks, whether or not, we allow backpacks in the building. We went through that in the spring a little bit. So I had some parents who said, they weren't going to send their kids while we were allowing backpacks. And so we had to talk it through. What are their concerns and how can we help with that? And providing community supports. Our district just came out with this little information sheet of community resources. It's school and community resources on everything from, housing, food, medical support, etc. So when families need help, I have the tools to offer. Well, here's who you can call, or here's what we can help you with, because your kid has to get to school in order to succeed. They have to be here in order to learn and grow. I know that there's a lot more.
I so
talk about
appreciate
with questions and answers.
We are going to go back into Q&A. I do want to point out one thing that Grand Rapids also did, which is you talked about those family support liaisons who met with the kids over the summer and then became part of the attendance club. There was also a pretty intensive support for them to shift to a much more positive and engaging approach. In Grand Rapids, like many places, folks started sometimes even as like truancy officers, where the notion was I gotta kind of shame kids into coming into school. Like that was present across our entire country in many ways. And there was an intentional effort to shift from blame to positive engagement, starting in the summer, where you don't even talk about attendance, but just get to build a relationship with kids and families. And it seems like that really paid off in your case in Aberdeen. And it also points to the importance of districts supporting you as principals with everything from, these attendance, the family sports specialists, to the resources on schools. With that, I want to shift it over to Brian. So we just now had a picture of what this looks like at an elementary level. So what does it look like to improve attendance in a high school, Ryan?
It's really interesting coming from the high school perspective, just listening to Victoria speak. There are so many similarities, I think, between. Sure, there's developmental differences between students. There's different life events that students are experiencing, but at the same time, our focus, like theirs in Grand Rapids, has been a really robust Tier 1 experience for our students. The majority of our attendance efforts is ensuring that every kid feels connected and safe while at Bristol Central High School. And so we've employed a bunch of strategies for that. You can see on this slide, most importantly, we are trying to build relationships with all of our students, both relationships between faculty and staff and students, as well as between student and student. And we've used a bunch of strategies for that. Just like the elementary school, we have actually found ways to make sure that every single student is greeted here at the door as they enter before their day starts. So by 7:30, every single student that walks through the doors of Bristol Central has had hopefully a trusted adult, often an administrator as well, give them the secret handshake, say hello, how was your day? How's your day going? What'd you have for breakfast? Debating waffles or pancakes, just really fun ways to get kids into the building. Our goal is to know every student by name, strength, need, and story. We hear the name, strength, and need quite a bit, but every single student comes into our building with a story that is unique to themselves. And the better that we can understand that story, the better relationship we can build with them. We are the Bristol Central Rams. And so we use the word Ram as a play on words for a bunch of our different programs here. So, we do refer to ourselves as the Ramley rather than family. And so, being part of the Ramley has high expectations, but also has a high level of reward with it. We work really hard to build community, again, amongst students and staff. So you can see in one of the pictures, we have community events all the time. That right there is from our pre-holiday Festivus party, in which students rolled through the gym and all different types of fun and games, full, student dances, music, just ways to really try to connect with the school. We know that the more we can have students in our building, the better off students are often going to be. We want them here before school, during school, after school, supervised, but participating in productive activities and building relationships with both trusted adults as well as their peers. We also offer a weekly advisory. like many high schools, we have a daily homeroom period that's 8 minutes every day. There are daily check-ins with students by their advisor. We also have a weekly extended advisory that happens every Wednesday for about 25 minutes to a half an hour. The purpose of that is twofold. We have SEL lessons that are explicitly taught to students then, but we've shifted not away from that, but we understand that SEL is done so often at the tier 1 level in classrooms as well during the actual content instruction. And so we're using a lot of that time to build community amongst students at a similar grade level. We use our Rambassador program, which is a group of seniors who apply, get interviewed. If accepted, they they enjoy a 2-day leadership training in the summer before their senior year. And they actually facilitate our whole grade 9 freshman orientation in the summer. It's not a bunch of administrators or teachers saying, these are the rules of Bristol Central. Here's the list of supplies you need to bring the first day. It's really about building relationships between our baby Rams and our soon-to-be seniors. Twofold, it gives those seniors that empowers them to share our expectations of how we do things, but also to build those relationships and make sure our youngest of students feel safe and comfortable here. So the majority of that day is spent having fun, building relationships, playing games, taking tours, food. You know, it's just really a fantastic day to welcome kids into our Ramley. So we really work for that robust tier 1 experience for all of our kids. If you could please click this slide, Jack. I do know that, you know, where we've really improved over the past few years is with our tier 2 and tier 3 strategies. So I'm going to speak very quickly about the tier 2 work that we do. When I first started taking attendance over 4 or 5 years ago, it was beyond overwhelming. You know, we have a school of well over 1,000 kids. We're coming out of a pandemic, and we have so many kids who weren't showing up enough. And so to have a spreadsheet and look at 300, 400, 600 kids that you wanted to engage, we really struggled at first to how do we build those partnerships with these families? How do we reach out to these families and get kids to school more often? And we really realized the first thing we have to do is have accurate and robust up-to-date data. If the data we have isn't always accurate, if different people in the district are pulling it at different times, and or if we don't have this data that coming to us in real time, then we're not going to be able to target our most vulnerable populations, but also those students who are most borderline. So as of the past 2 years, we've really been focusing our tier 2 work around students who are very close to or borderline chronic. To define chronic, it's 10% of the school year. So we've been able to create in PowerSchool a custom report where at any given moment, I can click one date and click it to an end date and identify any student that has missed more than 10% of school throughout that time. So even I had a question before today's webinar about, you know, that February data you presented, like, how did you get that? And it's really, again, it takes a team. We have some great PowerSchool folks in central office who have been able to create this custom report for us. We also have some great folks who have created these really robust spreadsheets for us. Again, this top picture is just a clip that has about 1,500 lines right now, but it allows us to disaggregate data in a multitude of ways, identify students by school counselor, by how many absences, by high needs, are they SPED, are they multilingual learners, as well as record some of the interventions that we have done in the right. And we have drop-down menus for ease for a variety of staff who implement these interventions, where they can just click the drop-down button, click what they've done, kind of date, and then anything else that's been happening. You know, this month, as we target a population, we know that our grade 9 and grade 10 attendance tends to be one of our larger problem areas still. And so we have focused the majority of our tier 2 work on students with 8 to 10 absences so far this school year who are in grade 9 and 10. And that has led us to 58 students. By focusing on those 58, with, of course, other students are getting other interventions, but by really thinking about that 58 and how can we get them to school more, we've been able to move those numbers quite a bit. But it's not really about the numbers. I mean, the numbers indicate the work we're doing, I think, and also the need that we still have. But what it allows us to do is inform families and educate parents. There's monthly letters going home to build those partnerships that aren't disciplinary in nature, but rather, hey, we need to partner together to make sure your son or daughter is in school. Here's the state policy, and how do we make sure that no parent wants their kid to be considered chronically absent. And just by hearing that term and seeing what the policy is and that clarity often encourages parents to get their kids to school more often.
Ryan, there's a question in the chat that's asking about what do you do about kids who show up to school, they're in the building, but they're actually skipping class?
Ew, that never happens. No, yeah, it's the age-old high school question, right? I mean, we've made movies about this for the past 30 years. It happens. Again, we've been able to really rethink our tier 2 and tier 3 interventions, but also the way we supervise our building. So we've been able to capitalize on ESSER funds to hire a variety of support staff that we did not have prior to the pandemic, both with paraeducators whose job is to supervise, with climate and culture specialists / security specialists, with a behavior intervention specialist. We don't have a social worker in our high school. And so finding ways to best address our student needs, but also supervise the building throughout the course of the day. And so we're very, very direct in knowing who's going to be monitoring what areas of the building at what times. We also have a security guard who's on the cameras at all times, not for, again, disciplinary things, but identify if there are kids in the stairwell that should be moseying along to class. How do we get them there? So we've really been able to cut down on the skipping within the building. I will tell you, right after COVID, we did have some issues there. Kids trying to hide in single stall bathrooms, possibly, in the locker room during gym, they're not going out to gym. And so really just being aware of that and being really explicit about how can we better improve that has been a strategy for us. It takes those resources. I'm so thankful for our superintendent and our Board of Education who have resourced us in a way that we can much more proactively address those types of issues. And it comes, again, it's collaborative as a team. At the bottom, I talk about monthly improvement cycles, and every single month we are looking at the data. We are talking with a wide variety of people. We are calling parents into meetings. We are sending correspondence home. Listen, they're 16, 17, 18 years old. We're swagging the heck out of those kids too. T-shirts, bags, all sorts of fun things. We're putting it on daily announcements. We're trying to find ways to recognize positive attendance, but also up top, if you can see, I know you can't see my cursor, but in those kind of green, red areas of that top chart, we're able to identify students who have been chronic this year who no longer are. So how do we shout that out? How do we identify where that growth has happened and provide that positive reinforcement to families to build those partnerships rather than have that problem focus of your kid's not coming to school enough? And that's been extremely successful for us.
Great question, Ryan, asking about what kind of tracking software program are you using to monitor your interventions? Is that part of PowerSchool? Is that something separate, or Google Spreadsheets?
That's a great question. So we haven't paid for any services yet. This is a Google sheet that's been created by a woman, Ashley, who works in our central office. She is just absolutely wonderful. As a district, over the past 2 years, we've really been able to centralize our data. Like I said earlier, we've been, over 8,000 students here in Bristol, and every building was pulling different things at different times. And so by standardizing that and Ashley's knowledge and expertise of taking PowerSchool and linking it to the Google sheet and pulling the right things at the right time has made my job as a building administrator so much easier, where rather than spend the majority of time mining the data, we have the data so we can actually be intentional in planning and addressing, the needs that we may have.
And then, Ryan, I want to actually ask Victoria similarly how they monitor and track and whether you have a system in place.
Yes, we have Synergy as our student information system. And so we have a variety of reports that we pull from that as well. And so we can monitor the data weekly, semester, marking period. We can break it down in any of the different formats as well. Sometimes it's a little cumbersome to find the report you need, but that's where like Mel Atkins or somebody comes into play, is to say, hey, this is the report we need. Does it exist? And if not, how can we get that set up? Because it's important to access the data so you're using real information and not guesswork.
I'm now going to ask Lauren to join us. Lauren Waters-Cherry, who also was a school administrator and district administrator in time. And sort of, why don't we take off the slides for a moment? And I want to just have a little bit more of a free-flowing, cross-cutting conversation. There was one question in the chat that I wanted to start with. And this was a question of, how do you work with parents when you think they may actually be enabling the students' absenteeism? And maybe I think that actually parents are part of the equation both in elementary and high school. So Victoria, maybe you start, and then Ryan, how do you think about that?
That is a tricky question. And, you know, as when we're talking about this, I didn't want it to sound like we are parent blaming. And I know I said at the elementary level, the families really are a key part of getting their kids to school. So it goes back to that listening. Why aren't the kids coming to school? And listening, and like I said, kind of listening between the lines for what's really going on. You know, I've had parents where they're single parents and their child's their buddy, and they've had a bad day, so they want to keep the child home because they need it. And it's like, so meeting with those parents to talk about the importance of school success and why the child needs to be in school and how this truly is, it's a need. And most of my parents, as you already saw, are economically disadvantaged, and they have a lot of life struggles. And so I really try to encourage that we're trying to help make sure that your child has an easier path than what you're currently going through. And it starts with this attendance. You know, I mentioned that I know people who've lost their jobs because they didn't show up to work or didn't show up to work on time. We're trying to establish those habits now with the students so they're on a path to success. And of course, the academics, that they need to be here in order to learn. But it goes back to that listening component of what do they really need. I had a mom who's a special needs mom herself, not just that her children were, but she herself. And she said, Mrs. Simon, they just won't listen to me. It's time to go to bed and they won't listen to me. So I sat down with her kids, and we developed a bedtime routine, and we developed a morning routine with times based on what that family does in the evening and in the morning in order to get to school on time. And so they would have this checklist to post on their mirror in the morning, for example. And I said, instead of saying, you know, mommy says it's time to go to bed, you say, it's time to go to bed. Now it's time to brush your teeth. Now it's time, you know, and put the blame on the checklist instead of on the parent. And so that was a less traditional support, but it helped for that family.
You know, it reminds me, Victoria, that one of the things I think happened in the pandemic is parents became isolated from resources that they typically might have to help them with parenting. Parenting, boy, all of us were parents. This is not this is sometimes feels like rocket science. It's not that easy. And, you know, you struggle, but it helps when you can talk to other parents. And we almost got caught off from that for how do we find these strategies? Ryan, what would you say? How do you do this at the high school level?
Yeah, so again, I think there are a lot of similarities. We've actually created bedtime routines with high school families as well, Victoria. So I mean, there are similarities there. I would say this, we do have parents who us educators would say enable, but I come from the perspective that all parents want their students to be successful. And that is an absolute common ground that we have with families. So finding that common ground, and again, we go back to that word partnership rather than, you know, problem focused, building that partnership with families. And if you have those relationships ahead of time, it makes these conversations much easier too. So, you know, we try to make positive phone calls home. We try to meet parents in the parking lot. We try to put our faces and names to these families. So we have that. But I'll tell you this, we're pretty direct. If you have those relationships, we don't sugarcoat things. We educate, we talk about policy, we talk about the need to be in school. We provide data, both national and local data, for what being in school and graduating from high school can do, both from an economic sense, but also from an educational sense and just a happiness in life. We go to home, like we're at the point, we're doing home visits. You know, we're not going to rip a kid out of bed and drag them to school, but we also know that knocking on the door, we've been invited in for coffee, we've been invited. So having those relationships with parents, and interacting with them where they are the parent, we are the school, they are with them much more often. So the question, how can we support you? What do you need from us? What can we do to support you in your quest to make sure your child is as successful as possible? Because we need them here every single day.
So appreciate this. Lauren, I want to shift gears for 1 second because this webinar was supported by a union. We also have our, and unions are a big part of the fabric of schooling. How can unions help us do this work?
Thank you. That's such a great question. Sometimes we forget that our school, family, and community members, they're also union members. They represent transportation, sanitation, healthcare workers, the entertainment industry, sports industry, civil servants, machinists, automotive industry, electricians. Our parents are veterans. They are a part of music guild. They're firefighters, they're faith-based workers, trade workers, and so much more. We in the unions, we want to be engaged, and parents want to be engaged. Both Victoria and Ryan, this conversation has talked about a mind shift and how do we do things differently. I think building upon those union relationships can be a valuable resource. Invite us to your school activities. There are millions of union members in America from all walks of life. And as we educate them, educating us, including us in this important conversation, our united voice can make a significant, I think, impact and difference in reducing chronic absenteeism across this nation. Thank you for that
Lauren,
question.
I also wonder, I have to say, one of the districts we first worked with in California, ABC Unified, we worked with the district through the union. And the union actually was the group that first helped to crunch the chronic absence numbers for the district, because the union's perspective was that knowing this information was crucial for helping their union members to do the job, and also helpful for them setting out a common agenda with the district about what teachers and administrators could do. So I also think there's the union that's within schools. Not everyone's unionized, but for those that could be an asset. And I don't know. I guess I also ask Ryan and Victoria, as you think about, I know we have to shift to resources at the end, but if you were to give just a couple of words advice for another principal who's thinking about doing this work, what would your key advice be?
Just like academics and behavior often just come right to the forefront. We're here to teach kids, and if we can't teach them if they don't behave, but it all starts with attendance. We're not going to teach them if they don't show up. And that's why for me, it is that attendance, behavior, course performance, and English language learning, because they need to be here. And that's what it starts with. And so we think of attendance as being stuff that happens outside of schools. All those barriers are outside of schools, but we need to bring the kids into school. So we need to recognize what those barriers are and how to overcome them. And every school is its own community, and they're each a little bit different. So I can give you what worked for me, and Ryan can share what worked for him. But ultimately, you have to look at your own school community and dig to see what your resources are and what your barriers are, so you can find ways to fix those. But it comes back for me to the relationships and the recognition.
Thank you. Ryan.
Yeah, it has to be intentional. And it is that mindset shift. Sure, we don't have kids, from 2:15 in the afternoon until 7:30 the next morning, but we have kids from 7:30 until 2:15. So what can we control within our locus of control to improve attendance and get kids here more often? And what I'm learning and continue to learn, this is a journey, is small changes can lead to big results. You don't have to change the numbers all in one day or in 1 year. What's your 1 or 2 things that you want to get better at, and focus on that and get better at that? And that's going to have a positive impact on students and families, and hopefully student outcomes. And so, like I said, when I first started this work, I mean, it's still overwhelming at times, but to really know that a small focus, an intentional focus, and a monthly cycle of improvement is so important to having large scale results. So I just think, and the last thing I would say, it takes a team. This is not me. This is not even our school. It's a district. It's our teachers. You know, you talk about the unions and the administrative unions, but teachers unions as well, sharing the message that this is everyone's job. This isn't, you know, somebody sitting in an office in central office or a principal, or this is everyone's job to play their part to ensure that kids come to school as often as possible. And so relying on great people around me, and having a similar mindset, and then starting small and focusing small and having actionable steps every month makes it feasible.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Cecilia really quickly to go through quick resources, and then Lauren to close.
Thank you so much for that inspiring discussion. So I'm going to share a few resources with you. I want to make sure that you have our analysis of the 21-22 chronic absence data. It's not just the data, but it's the implications of the need for support from districts, so that administrators, teams in schools that we've heard of, like the ones today, actually have the tools they need in order to do the work. Next slide. And if you're out there wondering what is happening in my own district, along with this analysis is an interactive map of chronic absence, so you could take a good look at your own data and how you compare to neighboring districts. Next slide. And finally, I invite you to continue to engage with others that are doing exemplary work. So join the attendance awareness campaign. We're about to kick off in April. And you don't want to miss any of the great resources that we have available for you. So that's it for resources. We'll follow up with the recording and all those other pieces that people have been just enjoying today. And send those resources out. You can check the Attendance Works website if you wish. We'll have the recording and slides posted very shortly. And now, Hetty, I'm turning this back to Lauren because she has a few words to say in closing.
Thank you so much, Cecilia. What an exciting and intentional time we've just spent together. But before we close this evening's robust conversation on chronic absenteeism, I have to thank our incredible panelists representing the Biden-Harris administration: Adam Schott, Office of Elementary and Secondary Education; Attendance Works, Hetty Chang, Executive Director and President; her entire team, which have had eyes on low-income children missing school since the early 2000s. Cecilia Leong, Vice President of Programming; School Administrators Victoria Simon and Ryan Broderick. Lastly, I invite you to listen to a few words from our partner organizations on this important and critical issue of chronic absenteeism. First, let me introduce National Association of Elementary School Principals Associate Executive Director, Policy and Advocacy, David Griffith. David, please share some thoughts and reflections.
Thank you, Lauren, and I couldn't agree more. I want to thank all the panelists for just a fantastic webinar that was so informative. We really appreciate what Attendance Works and Victoria and Ryan and I'm just judging by the comments in the chat box, what everyone is doing to help address, unfortunately, what is this critical post-pandemic problem. One of the things that, for me, is it just really came to mind was how insidious this issue is, and how quietly and quickly it could set students back. I was thinking like a rip current or quicksand that you don't notice or seems harmless, but can quickly sort of get you into trouble. And that it's so hard to recover from. And, I was reminded, especially because for elementary school students, and this blew my mind, that many of them who are chronically absent have actually excused absences for the days they've missed. So it really is something that they fly under the radar on. I just say, again, best practices in terms of what's best for all students, but especially important for chronically absent students. So, for school leaders, knowing your students, creating a warm, nurturing learning environment, creating connections and establishing relationships with trusted adults and students, creating student and family engagement opportunities, on and on. Really what you've talked about and what Victoria and Ryan talked about as well. I would just say, look, at the end, principals have a critical role to play in this area and calling attention to the issue and helping address it. And so NAESP is here to help all principals with information, tools, resources like this webinar to help you in this work and to continue on, and we'll be right there with you. So thank you so much to Lauren, to AFSA, to NASSP, and especially our panelists here today.
David, thank you so much. Next, I'd like to welcome our very good friend, National Association of Secondary School Principals, CEO, Ron Nozoy. Ron?
Thank you very much, Lauren. And adding to Dave's thanks to everyone who participated here. Hetty, it's been a while since we worked together in Hawaii, but you and Attendance Works are still doing the nation's best work around this subject. And as Dave said to Lauren, and of course, my buddy over there, to make sure that we thanked everyone who joined. Sorry, my buddy Len over there, I got distracted by noise. We want to thank everybody who joined and for all the work that you do in schools and communities every single day around this very important topic. You know, as Dave was saying, you know, the public wants to can't you just fix your attendance? And people don't understand that it's not any one silver bullet, which all of you here that were presenting and sharing and have joined the call know that there is no silver bullet to there. But I think, as Ryan was saying, I believe that it's all about intentionality, and you need to be, you know, it needs to be a whole school approach, a whole community approach to it. So thank you very much, AFSA, for your leadership in this realm and for including NASSP and, of course, Dave and NAESP in this effort. Last thing I will say is in the summer of 2024, this summer, we will be together. NAESP and NASSP will be together. And Len, to all your wonderful AFSA members across the country, we welcome their attendance at our conference, where we'll be bringing together K-12 principals from all over the country to talk about what's important in the profession and to advocate and stand tall for the heroic work that our members do in the field every single day. So thank you very much for your time. Congrats, AFSA, for a wonderful learning experience, and good to see you again, Hetty. Thank you.
Ron, thank you so very much for sharing and for inviting all of us and making that conference available to all of us. Last but not least is our very own American Federation of School Administrators, President Dr. Leonard Puglisi, whose concern about chronic absenteeism in our schools was the catalyst and the driver that moved this webinar to reality. Lynn.
Hey, thank you, Lauren. And thank you, Lauren, for your leadership today. I want to extend a heartfelt acknowledgement to the dedicated team at Attendance Works for their tireless efforts at addressing chronic absenteeism and for leading today's insightful professional learning webinar. Their commitment to this critical issue is commendable, and we are grateful for their partnership. I also express gratitude to our esteemed partners at NASSP and NAESP for their ongoing collaboration. By working together on important topics like this, we strengthen our collective impact and better serve school leaders nationwide. I look forward to future partnerships and working together. In recent years, the issue of chronic absenteeism has increasingly received attention, reaching what can only be described as a crisis proportion. As school administrators, it's incumbent upon us to not only advocate for sound policy positions and legislative action, but also equip ourselves with the tools necessary to effectively address this pressing issue. Here at AFSA, we are committed to supporting school leaders in navigating the complexities of addressing absenteeism. Through education and professional development initiatives, we aim to empower administrators with the resources needed to foster a culture of engagement within their school communities. Today's webinar is just one instance of our ongoing efforts to provide valuable learning opportunities for school leaders. By coming together to share insights, best practices, and innovative approaches, we can collectively work towards reducing chronic absenteeism and ensure that every student has the opportunity to thrive academically and socially. Thank you all for your dedication to this important cause, and I look forward to the discussions we will have in the future. On behalf of the more than 25,000 absent school leaders across the United States, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands, I say to you all, until next time, be well and stay well.
Thank you. This concludes our webinar, and please take an opportunity to complete the evaluation that I believe is linked in the chat. Thank you all so very much. Be safe, continue to do this work, and we look forward to working with you again. Have a nice evening, everyone.